Your cat may have lived with you for years, but there are things about her you probably still don't know. Cats are far more complex than most people realise, and some facts about them sound like science fiction. Stick around, because the answer to how cats find their way home from hundreds of miles away is waiting at the very end, and it's stranger than you'd expect. These are 17 unusual facts that will change everything you thought you knew about cats. Just like people are right-handed or left-handed, cats can be right-pawed or left-pawed, and researchers have actually studied it. Instead of watching which hand someone reaches with, scientists watch which paw a cat uses first to bat at a toy, swipe at something, or fish a treat out of a narrow opening. A study conducted at Queen's University Belfast found an interesting pattern. Research suggests that male cats are more likely to show a left paw preference, while females are more likely to show a right paw preference. Scientists think this may be linked to hormonal differences and how testosterone and estrogen influence brain development, though the exact mechanism is still being studied. You can actually test this at home. Put a treat inside a narrow jar or cup and watch which paw your cat uses to reach in. Repeat it 10 times. If she uses the same paw 8 times out of 10, that's likely her dominant paw. It's a fun little experiment, and it might tell you something about your cat you never noticed before. Here's why cats always seem to land on their feet. A cat tumbles off a bookshelf back first, flips itself over mid-air in a fraction of a second, and lands on all 4 paws like it was choreographed. It looks like magic, but there's real physics and unique anatomy behind it. Inside a cat's inner ear sits a vestibular system that detects the body's position in space almost instantly. The moment the brain registers I'm falling and I'm not oriented right, the righting reflex kicks in a behaviour shaped over millions of years of evolution. First, the cat rotates its head into a horizontal position, using both vision and its vestibular system as reference points. Then, the front half of the body follows the head. Then, the back half rotates to catch up. A flexible spine with around 30 vertebrae lets the front and back halves twist almost independently, like 2 separate sections working together. The righting reflex happens incredibly fast, but a cat still needs enough time and space to complete the rotation. This is actually why short falls, say, off a couch or a low chair, can sometimes be more dangerous than a fall from higher up. There simply isn't always enough time for the cat to fully orient itself and absorb the landing properly, which can lead to awkward landings and injuries. It's a good reminder that cats always land safely isn't a guarantee it's a reflex, not a superpower. Can a cat actually recognise its own name? It can, and it's been scientifically tested. A study published in a major scientific journal in 2019 found that cats can distinguish their own name from other words, and from the names of other cats living in the same household. They respond by turning their ears, moving their head, or flicking their tail even when a complete stranger says the name, not just their owner. That suggests they're recognising the actual sound pattern of their name, not simply reacting to a familiar voice. Here's the catch though. Recognising a name and choosing to respond to it are 2 very different things. Your cat almost certainly hears you perfectly well when you call her, and she understands you're addressing her specifically. Whether she gets up is a completely separate decision, based on whatever seems more worthwhile in that exact moment. She's not necessarily ignoring you. Cats simply don't treat every call as a command they're obligated to obey, and more often than not, staying curled up on the couch wins. Cats also have more bones than humans, with much of the difference coming from the spine and tail. A cat's spine contains roughly 30 vertebrae, compared to a human spine's 26, and that extra flexibility is exactly what lets cats twist mid-air, squeeze through gaps barely wider than their own head, and curl into positions that look almost impossible. The tail alone can contain somewhere between 19 and 23 vertebrae, each one independently mobile. That makes the tail a genuinely multi-purpose tool, a counterbalance when walking along a narrow railing, a rudder during a jump or a sudden turn, and a mood indicator that shifts in real time depending on how the cat is feeling. Their flexible spine and extra vertebrae are essentially what give cats their signature flexibility, helping them twist, leap, and squeeze into spaces that seem far too small for them. Ever wonder why a cat's eyes glow in the dark? You flip on a light at night, step into a dark room, and two glowing discs stare back at you from somewhere near the floor. Not red like in horror movies, usually green, yellow, or a pale blue, depending on the cat's eye colour. If you're not used to it, it can genuinely startle you. Behind the retina of a cat's eye sits a specialised layer of cells called the tapetum lucidum. It works almost like a tiny mirror, reflecting light that's already passed through the retina back onto the photoreceptor cells, giving them a second chance to pick up any light they missed the first time. This gives the retina another chance to detect light that would otherwise be lost, helping cats see much better in dim conditions than humans can. The glow you notice at night is simply that reflected light bouncing back out through the pupil, the same way a flashlight beam bounces off a mirror. The exact colour depends on the structure of the tapetum and the cat's pigmentation. Siamese and some blue-eyed cats can produce a reddish glow. Cats do sweat, just not the way we do. They have very few sweat glands across most of their body. Cats have sweat glands mainly in their paw pads, which is why a stressed cat can leave damp little paw prints on a vet's exam table. Vets actually treat this as a visible sign of anxiety in a nervous patient. Since sweating isn't really an option for most of their body, cats cool down in other ways, mainly through grooming. Since saliva evaporating off the fur pulls heat away from the skin, and by seeking out cooler surfaces like bathroom tiles, a sink, or a bare kitchen floor, although they may also pant when they're very hot or stressed. That's exactly why you'll often find a cat sprawled belly down on cold tile during a hot day. The belly has the thinnest fur coverage on the whole body, so direct contact with a cool surface helps cool the blood flowing close to the skin. Do cats dream? They very likely do. During sleep, a cat's brain cycles through the same stages a human brain does, including REM sleep, the stage most strongly associated with vivid dreaming in humans. During REM sleep, cats' paws twitch as if they're running, their whiskers move, and their ears swivel towards sounds that aren't there. Sometimes the tail flicks, and every so often you'll hear a soft, muffled meow or a low growl. A study conducted at MIT found that in animals during sleep, similar neural patterns activate in the same brain regions that were active during specific waking behaviours. Scientists can't know exactly what a cat dreams about, but the brain activity seen during REM sleep suggests their dreams may be connected to experiences from their waking life. If she spent the afternoon stalking a fly across the windowsill, there's a decent chance her sleeping brain is replaying some version of that hunt. Here's something odd you may have noticed. Cats barely chew their food. That's because a cat's jaw only moves up and down, almost like a pair of scissors. It can't perform the side-to-side grinding motion that humans and many other omnivores use to break food down. A cat's jaw is built primarily for biting and shearing, rather than the grinding motion humans use when chewing their teeth are shaped to tear and slice, not to mash. As a result, cats often swallow relatively large pieces of food with much less grinding than humans would ever attempt. This actually explains a lot of behaviours that puzzle cat owners. Why does she sometimes bring up a barely chewed chunk of food a few minutes after eating? Why does she eat so fast? And why do so many cats seem to prefer smooth PT over chunky textures? Their digestive system is adapted to handling relatively large pieces of food, which makes sense for an animal that evolved to eat small prey without much grinding, though sometimes those bigger chunks are still harder for the stomach to handle on the first try. It's also true that cats sleep an enormous amount on average, somewhere between 12 and 16 hours a day, and some cats, especially kittens and older cats, can sleep close to 20 hours. This isn't laziness, and it isn't a sign of illness by itself. It's an evolutionary strategy that stuck around long after it stopped being strictly necessary. In the wild, a cat is a predator built for short, explosive bursts of activity, rather than long, sustained effort. Every hunt costs a huge amount of energy relative to the size of the animal, and the only reliable way to make up for that cost is rest. A house cat doesn't need to stalk prey, evade predators, or patrol a territory for food, but the underlying energy conservation instinct is still fully wired into her brain. 10,000 years of living alongside humans hasn't rewritten millions of years of evolution. Cats are also incredible jumpers, and it's one of the more impressive stats in the entire animal kingdom relative to body size. A healthy cat can sometimes jump several times its own body height, from a complete standstill, no running start required, just one explosive push off the hind legs. Scaled up to human proportions, that kind of jump would be roughly like someone leaping straight onto the roof of a 3-story building from a standing position on the sidewalk. The secret is in the hind leg anatomy. A cat's back legs are noticeably longer than the front ones, and packed with powerful extensor muscles that work almost like a loaded spring, storing energy through the crouch and then releasing it all at once. Before jumping, a cat typically crouches and rocks slightly, visually judging the distance while its brain works out the angle, and force needed often precise enough to land cleanly on something as narrow as the top of a fence. Here's a contradiction a lot of cat owners notice. A cat that hisses at a puddle and takes the long way around a wet floor can somehow sit at the sink for 10 minutes, transfixed, batting at water dripping from the tap. It seems contradictory, but for a cat, still water and moving water are essentially two different categories of thing. Still water, like in a bathtub, mostly just means getting the coat completely soaked. Wet fur loses its insulating properties, gets heavy, and temporarily strips a cat of the speed and agility it relies on. Running water, on the other hand, is unpredictable. It moves, catches the light, changes shape, and behaves erratically. And anything that moves unpredictably tends to switch on a cat's hunting instincts. For a cat's hunting brain, that unpredictable movement can be just as stimulating as chasing a small insect. She's not trying to bathe in it, she's trying to catch it. Take a closer look at a cat's eyes and you'll notice something strange about the pupils. On a bright day, they narrow down to thin vertical lines, letting in the bare minimum of light. In deep dusk or darkness, they expand into huge round discs that can take up nearly the entire visible iris, making the eyes look almost completely black. That vertical slit shape is a signature trait of close-range ambush predators. It allows for much finer control over how much light hits the retina across an enormous range of conditions, from harsh midday sun to near darkness, while also sharpening horizontal depth perception. That matters a lot for an animal that launches an attack from cover and has to judge distance to a target with split-second accuracy at the exact moment of the pounce. Interestingly, big cats, lions, tigers, leopards, cheetahs actually have round pupils, not vertical slits. The difference comes down to hunting style. Big cats tend to chase prey across open ground over longer distances, so they don't rely as heavily on that close-range precision. Small cats, including the one on your couch, specialise in short, explosive ambush attacks. And for that style of hunting, the vertical pupil may give small ambush predators an advantage when judging distance at close range. Cats are also surprisingly fast. Over short distances, a domestic cat can reach around 30 mph in a short burst, putting it above the peak speed recorded by Usain Bolt, whose top recorded speed was around 27 mph. The anatomy behind it is impressive. The flexible spine bends and straightens like a spring with every stride, extending the length of each leap. The hind legs, longer than the front, work like a catapult, and the claws dig into the surface for traction the same way spikes do on a sprinter's shoes. But that speed lasts only for a short burst before fatigue quickly sets in. A cat is a sprinter, not a marathon runner, and every part of her body is built for one lightning-fast dash that decides a hunt in just a few seconds. Even a cat's nose is unique. The tiny ridges and patterns on a cat's nose are highly individual, which is why people sometimes compare them to fingerprints. Each cat's nose has its own distinct network of tiny ridges and bumps, and this pattern is set before birth and stays the same for life. Some shelters and veterinary researchers have experimented with nose photographs as a possible identification tool and there's genuine scientific interest in the idea. That said, unlike microchipping, nose prints aren't currently a standard and universally reliable method of identifying lost cats. It's a fascinating bit of biology, but if you're relying on something to help bring a lost cat home, a microchip and a collar tag are still the tools that actually work at scale. But all of those abilities put together are honestly nothing compared to what's coming next. Because there's one mystery about cats that scientists still can't completely explain. But here's something else you probably don't know about your cat. Those whiskers are far more important than they look. A cat's whiskers aren't just decorative fur. They're deeply rooted, highly sensitive structures, connected to a dense network of nerve endings, and they're roughly 3 times thicker than an ordinary strand of fur. Whiskers help a cat judge whether it can fit through a gap, since the whisker span roughly matches the width of the body. They also detect tiny changes in air currents, which helps a cat sense nearby objects and movement, even in near-total darkness, almost like a form of passive radar. Whiskers aren't limited to the face. Either most cats also have shorter, sensitive whiskers on the backs of their front legs, which help them track a struggling prey item or toy at close range. And when a cat's whiskers are pinned flat back against the face, that's often a sign of stress or fear, while relaxed. Forward-facing whiskers usually mean a calm, curious cat. And here's another one that surprises most cat owners. Purring doesn't always mean happiness. Most people assume purring only means a cat is content, but it's more complicated than that. Cats purr while relaxed and happy, sure, but they also sometimes purr while injured, frightened, or even while giving birth. One theory researchers have explored is that the frequency range of a cat's purr, often somewhere around 25 to 150 Hz, overlaps with frequencies that have been associated with promoting tissue and bone healing in some studies. That's led to the idea that purring might function partly as a low-level self-soothing or self-healing mechanism, not just a happiness signal. So the next time your cat purrs on your lap, it's probably contentment, but if she's purring at the vet's office while clearly stressed, that doesn't necessarily mean she's fine. It might just mean her body is doing what it's evolved to do in difficult moments too. And finally, here's the mystery we promised at the start. How do cats find their way home? There are stories of cats being lost hundreds of miles from home and somehow turning up at their original home weeks or even months later. Stories like this have been reported again and again, and simply calling it instinct doesn't really explain anything. Because instinct alone doesn't account for navigating terrain a cat has never encountered before. Here's the honest answer. Scientists don't fully know exactly how cats do this, but there are several possible explanations that researchers take seriously, and cats may be using more than one of them at once. The first is magnetoreception. Some research has identified magnetite containing cells in the brains of various animals, including cats. And magnetite is a mineral known to respond to Earth's magnetic field. The idea is that these cells might function like a rough internal compass, providing a general sense of direction regardless of terrain or visibility. It's a compelling hypothesis, though scientists are still working to understand exactly how significant a role it plays in cats specifically. The second possible explanation is an extraordinarily detailed sense of smell. Cats have an exceptionally powerful sense of smell, with tens of millions of scent receptors in the nose. Every environment carries its own unique smell signature, shaped by soil, plants, water sources, and the scent trails of other animals. It's plausible that a cat builds a kind of mental scent map of familiar territory and can navigate along a gradient of increasingly familiar smells as she gets closer to home, similar to how a person might follow the smell of fresh bread down a city block toward the bakery it's coming from. The third possibility is a sun-based sense of direction, sometimes called a solar compass, where an animal cross references the position of the sun with its internal body clock to estimate direction. This would only work in clear weather, but combined with scent cues and a possible magnetic sense, it could add up to a surprisingly capable, if still not fully understood, navigation system. So your house cat, the one who somehow still looks confused about which room her food bowl is in, maybe carrying around the same basic toolkit as a cat that wandered 200 miles home. It just never gets used. Because for her, home is about 6 feet away, right there on the couch. If any of these surprised you, drop a comment with the one that shocked you the most. And if you want more deep dives like this into the science behind everyday pet behaviour, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one.